to our next session. We're delighted to welcome back again this year Professor Amita Danda, who I know will be known to many of you, but I will introduce her briefly. She is a very good friend of the Centre for Disability Law and Policy and NUI Galway, and a long-time supporter of the work that is being done here. Professor Danda is a professor of law and head of the Centre for Disability Studies at the National Academy of Legal Studies and Research, University of Law, Hyderabad, India, where she teaches administrative law, law and poverty, law and literature, and judicial process. She's published extensively, as I'm sure you know, on questions relating to legal order and mental disorder, one of the key textbooks on the legal status of persons with mental illness, and a key reference now in the whole world of disability law. She has also worked closely with the Government of India and the Supreme Court of India in research in law and policy reform in the field of disability rights and human rights. Her research has been drawn upon by national and international bodies, including the WHO, UNICEF, Human Rights Commission of India, the National Commission for Women, and the National Institute for Mentally Handicapped. Professor Danda was also actively engaged in the work of the UN Ad Hoc Committee negotiating the CRPD, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. Amita, thank you.
I think with the number of Irish visas I have stamped on my passport, I'm increasingly being asked whether I come from Ireland. And I suppose I can, with great confidence, say that this is home away from home. And I suppose it is at that intersection of nationality, of friendship, of connection, that I stand as I speak to you on. The presentation which is lined up is about intersectionality, personality, legal capacity, or intersectionality, personality, legal capacity, intersectionality, whichever in the sequence. What I have titled my presentation, on the other hand, is more like insights on intersectionality. Since yesterday, you have been, in virtually every presentation that has come, you have been given a definition of intersectionality. Most people going back to Crenshaw and then sort of saying, what are the developments which have happened? How can you be fine-tuning and refining? Since I don't want to be left behind, I'm also going to give you a definition of intersectionality, but I am not connecting it with Crenshaw. I'm sort of talking more in terms of how should we view intersectionality today? What is it that we can get from this concept? And where is it that it can advance the discourse of rights? I sort of have two parts to my presentation. In the first half, I'm stressing on this fact of that in these days of divisiveness, of essential categories, what is it that intersectionality can give to us? The second half of my presentation is kind of focusing on that which the organizers wanted me to speak on, to look at the connection between intersectionality and legal capacity. So beginning with the definition, I somewhere say that when you talk about an intersection, that is, any intersection, you cut at several points. And when you cut at several points, each of those parts is a part of that whole because each is in that intersection. So it's like in the whole realm of intersectionality, you no longer speak about self and other. Instead, the other is self and the self is other. There is a constant kind of a connection or interconnection that is happening there. That's a way in which I would want you to visualize intersectionality. Like literally look at any sort of crossing of lines or points and see that how they interconnect. It's that connection that we need to be sort of stressing upon. And so consequently for me, intersectional identity, I would say, is an admixture of all the section it intersects. And I'm not here talking in terms of any particular intersection. I'm talking generically on the whole concept of intersectionality. Because I don't want us to sort of somewhere believe that intersections only happen in relation to, say, gender, disability, race, orientation. These are the kinds of things that we've been talking about. I'm sort of somewhere wanting us to go a step higher and think about intersectionality as something which connects us as humans. Because I want to make this distinction between intersectionality and discrimination, I am here wanting you all to look at these two as two separate conceptual categories and think accordingly. So I would say the manner in which I want us to think about or speak about intersectionality is somewhere driven by the theme of this summer school, which is speaking in terms of intersectionality as a tool for social change. And if it's as a tool for social change, then I do not think we can restrict it or constrict it only within the realm of multiple discrimination. So in intersectionality, I would sort of say that it focuses on commonalities. It focuses on that which is common between us and between me and the other, or the other and me, or the others and me. That's the way in which I would sort of see it. It sort of provides the various points at which we connect. It's primarily a positive kind of a concept. It's about joining people together. Intersectionality is telling us where all do we have connections. On the other hand, discrimination, I think, and multiple discrimination, moreover, is drawing attention to otherness. It is talking in terms of that which is being marked out, that which is being singled out. You are somewhere saying, I am not being treated the same as others. And the reason for doing that is because I'm this, that, or the other. So there's this various grounds which have been developed by the equality non-discrimination law. So you talk about sex, you talk about gender, you talk about place of origin, you might talk in terms of race, descent, you may talk about sexual orientation, you talk about disability. We have, over a period of long years of the jurisprudence that we have developed around equality non-discrimination, worked out a range of grounds on which people get singled out. So discrimination, on the other hand, is in the main focusing attention on how people get excluded or singled out. It could be any ground, and it could be like something which we did not think of as a relevant ground maybe some years ago or some decades ago, might become relevant today or may become relevant tomorrow. So it's like the entire focus somewhere of discrimination and multiple discrimination is on the various ways in which people get singled out, excluded, left out, and then we work out strategies of how we get them back. And so for me, discrimination, in contradistinction to intersectionality, is drawing attention to the negative processes of social interaction. It's talking in terms of how we socially interact, where whoever, lots of speakers since yesterday have been stressing on the fact of power, have been stressing on the fact of what authority you hold, and by reason of your power and authority, how you can be saying that this is the norm, this is the gold standard, and whoever doesn't fulfill it is the one who's going to be left out. And then people then speak about that whether I am part of this so-called norm or not is not something that I chose. It's not that, it is something that I was born with, whether it's the color of my skin or whether it is the community that I was born into or the caste that I kind of that I was kind of born. It's the basic things about that you were born into a specific affiliation, not an affiliation you chose. And when that particular affiliation that you were born into is why you are marked out, you call that discrimination. You say, and this is happening because I do not happen to belong into those power structures by which I could kind of wield. So I just want us to sort of somewhere distinguish and distinct between these two processes and not speak about them interchangeably. I understand very much that when intersectionality or the particular word was coined, it was trying to capture the fact that a particular individual could be discriminated at multiple points. And hence this was being highlighted at that point of time. I somewhere do genuinely think that multiple discrimination as a description or as a concept captures that well enough. But there is use for intersectionality which is distinct and different from discrimination, and I am urging you all to reflect on that. This is my position, but it's not something that, like amongst the things that are integral to any school or any system of exchange of learning and knowledge is to disagree, to agree, to disagree, and to agree to disagree. I mean, all of this is part of that entire range, and I am inviting all of that. But I am putting forth an argument and putting forth a proposition that in the times to come, it may be worthwhile for us to think of these two as separate categories with separate uses and not to sort of conflate one with the other. In furtherance of that argument, I am sort of putting forth that intersectionality fosters solidarity. Because if I am both the self and the other, and we say that we affiliate with people who are similar to us or who think like us, when I am both places, then evidently, it's like I deliberately started with the whole Indo-Irish personal story in the sense of that increasingly when I passed through the Irish immigration, it's more like, okay, so you're back. It's that kind of, and I don't feel I am coming to a strange place. I was sharing it with Gabor and I, who travel very often together. I think one place where we both can reach home without getting lost is Galway. It's like we could just virtually walk in sleep and know that exactly which bus line we have to take and where we have to go what, and talk to the taxi driver exactly what that mandatory conversation on the weather. It's like whatever is needed, is something that we have learned. And this business, and I definitely see, of course, between Ireland and India, there is a lot of common history. There is a lot of various other kinds of commonalities. The point I'm saying is, the moment you move to intersectionality, you start to see not just what is, where is it that you connect with the other? And then you start finding various ways in which that connection happens. Discrimination, on the other hand, is all the time telling us where are you different from the other and how that difference should not be pejoratively or prejudicially used against you. And I think that distinction is an important one. So if, in my opinion, connection is integral to solidarity. It's only when I find something between you and me which gets us to what we say click, that you start to move further and you move to friendship, you move to solidarity, you move to doing things together. You can't do it without that. And I'm sort of somewhere asking us to think in whichever one of these matrices that you pick up, can you really speak in terms of disabled and non-disabled as two polarities, as two opposites? Can any one of us really say that, yes, disability is something which is only the other? The range of whether it is the whole question of the variance in terms of mind and body. I mean, when we look at, let's look at anyone, let's look at the whole system of education. And the fact that disability education, more than anything else, has kind of brought into the educational sphere that one size doesn't fit all. If you really want to be doing education, then you need to be treating each person who's getting educated as a unique person. You need to be sort of showing there exactly what is it that that individual person needs. And the moment you learn how to individuate, you'll also find that there are a large number of individuals who study or learn in a certain kind of way. They're not in any predisposed category, but they can connect in that manner. The moment you recognize this diversity and this variance, and you allow people to connect with, then you are somewhere, creating an environment wherein we foster plurality, we recognize diversity, and we say that this is something worthy of nurturance. This is something which is good for us as humanity. Today, if any one of us is to seriously talk in terms of, forget about any individual country or community, but if we are not sort of like totally endorsing President Trump's environmental politics, we all have to recognize that we are facing difficult times as a planet. And if it is to survive, it can only survive if we are able to foster this connection between each other. We can think of the earth as something where we all reside, and we all would need to contribute in one or the other way for us to be able to take, if survival is something that we are serious about. Otherwise, we'll have to really think in terms of, okay, what is wrong with extinction? And then what are the kind of practices that we would need to be furthering if this is not to happen? And this is my larger thing about when we say intersectionality as a tool to social change. And I think this core of intersectionality needs to be absorbed and understood. It needs to be reflected upon. Each of us has to think in terms of that, all right, as an individual person, what are the various ways, who are the kind of people I wish I connect to, and how? And how do I nurture that further? So that's, you could say, one part of what I want to be saying, and that's the first part of my presentation, let's say. The second part is, what is the relevance of intersectionality to legal capacity? We have been, as part of the, let's say, the forward-looking reformist work that has come in from the CRPD, has been this recognition of universal legal capacity. It's been challenging the disqualifications which subsist in law, especially against people with intellectual, psychosocial, developmental disabilities, and to be saying that no, capacity is something which has to be presumed by the law. If you need support to exercise that capacity, then that support should be made available to whoever wants it on terms which have been specified, that it's not oppressive, it's not taking over, it's not an undue influence, it's kind of, if I want to be having it reviewed, whatever. It's like there's a certain set of standards that we have put out there. This universal legal capacity with support is the standard which has come from the CRPD. Now, the point that is to be asked is that, okay, what has this got to do with intersectionality? I want you to take a step back and say that if you look at the entire jurisprudence of legal capacity, or let's say lack of legal capacity or denial of legal capacity, it's primarily coming on biological grounds. You say a person with intellectual disability, a person with psychosocial disability, everywhere, somewhere, you're saying there's something not right with this individual. Hence, this individual cannot possibly be exercising legal capacity. And of course, we are doing this deprivation out of the goodness of our heart to protect this person from himself or herself, or the entire range of the sexual continuum, as to saying that, yes, we're just providing protection. The fact that this biology itself could be socially constructed is something that we don't really look at. We don't look at that how much of nutrition has got to do with intellectual, both development as well as impairment. We don't really look at that, okay, when the woman is pregnant, what kind of food she's getting is going to very greatly determine what's the kind of child she's going to be able to give birth to. We don't really look at how much of the sort of, and I'm deliberately stressing on food, as to how much of that food today is something which is good business, but may not be good health. And all of that is kind of happening to us and consequently impacting on the so-called biology, the fever I get or the delirium I get into, or the general sort of fuzziness that I feel. A colleague here has been worrying about dementia and worrying about the whole business of Alzheimer, and how much of that has to do with the sort of food that we eat, the sort of exercise that you can do, the kind of environment that you have around you. You're not focusing on any one of those. We are only speaking in terms of how to fix that individual. What is it? See, what is it that we can provide to this individual, be it in terms of medication, be it in terms of counseling, be it in terms of support. But is the problem that that individual or the groups of individual facing, can they be really understood in individual terms? And if they cannot be understood in individual terms, it's evident that we need to look more closely at social structures. We need to look at what has created those kinds of social structures, which is getting individuals to, let's say, feel the sort of pain and suffering that they are. Is it that individual person's problem, or it's our human problem? If we see it as a human problem, then you start seeing that connection between, what I was saying is that how biology is influenced by sociology. The sort of social structures which cause for us to have the minds and bodies that we have at a particular point of time. Intersectionality, in my view, in recognizing social positioning, forges that connection between the biological and the social, which is important for us to really understand what's the challenge before us. If we do not do that and we address one or the other, I genuinely do think that we address the symptoms, we don't really look at root causes. We don't ask the difficult questions, we don't make the difficult choices. And that's important for us. I'm not sort of saying that just by us asking the difficult questions, it'll all get sorted. I don't have such like illusions. I don't have such like illusions, even if like one was to say, let's get the right kind of legislation in place. I mean, in the previous session, somebody was worrying about the fact of that the entire common law jurisprudence goes in a particular kind of a way. How are we going to really do the reversal? My point somewhere is this, that first of all, whether it is law or it's policy or it's the various kind of programmatic interventions, they really post-date our firstly understanding what's the problem facing with us. And the reason for schools like these is to have those dialogues wherein you start to foundationally question some of your preconceptions about certain issues. And one of the things is basically this, that we believe that, if change has to come, if things have to be fixed, we as people are quite helpless. I think in a country which has resoundingly changed its own constitution, the power of the people is evident. And it's something that you find on a very continuous basis in different places at different points of time. But it's important that we recognize it, we accept it, and we acknowledge it. And that's the connection I would make between intersectionality and legal capacity. My opinion, in my view, basically, the entire biological thing is all wrong. It's undeniable. But to just say it's all wrong and we're going to be presuming that everybody has capacity and with support is maybe not going far enough. We definitely need, if we want to create support, we need to create way more elaborate social structures of support. We need to create an environment of solidarity. And it's only in that environment of solidarity can we start to then speak further in terms of, how legal capacity or the recognition of universal legal capacity is a recognition not just of all, but on the other side, I want to just complete that thought, that it's not just that you recognize biological vulnerability, you also recognize the vulnerability which comes due to social structures. You recognize that the vulnerabilities that people face through those social structures which don't find a recognition in the law is asking for a protection. So if we want to be setting up places or mechanisms of protection, they too need to be universal. And they need to be universal because biological capacity or incapacity is a very, very limited way of trying to understand this whole issue. And I don't want us to feel overwhelmed by the fact of, oh my God, then nearly everything is relevant. Yes, somewhere everything is relevant. But to recognize that, yes, this larger relevance is a resource, is a potential from which you can build further and you can think further in how you can be using intersectionality as a tool for social change. And before I thought I was, this I think, I'm sorry, but I'd more or less forgotten this slide, so I would have to take a few steps back and just make that connection. I've partly done it, but not fully done it, in the sense of one of the things is the moment you recognize that biology is socially constructed, you definitely also accept the fact that social opportunity impacts upon human biology. See, the reason, and I want to sort of make that connection here, in terms of that when we started the deliberations on the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, we had Robert Martin, a person with intellectual disability, who came in to give his first testimony before the committee. And when he was testifying before the committee, because I was sitting right next to him, I could see that his hands were trembling. Somebody had a supportive, set of hand on his back. It was important that he should read that testimony, and he read it. By the time the deliberations of the committee were over, Robert was not only raising his hand and kind of putting on his opinion, he was taking people with intellectual disability through the length and breadth of the UN and kind of orienting them on what is that they can be expected to do, what is where. It's basically a kind of thing on that as he got the opportunity, he evolved. And as he evolved, he helped others to evolve. And as all of you know, Robert today is a member of the committee, and Theresia would sort of testify to the fact of as to how very effective a member of the committee he is and how much he is doing there. And I think somewhere that's the basic point on that whole business of universal legal capacity, that when you disqualify people and you deny them opportunities, then if they cannot do after that, they cannot not do because they are in some ways insufficient. It's that they never got the chance to be able to evolve and develop. And that for me is, again, if you recognize that this connection between intersectionality and legal capacity and recognize that this is a dynamic process, then it opens up opportunities for people, and you have an evidence base for demonstrating that when you really open up opportunities, people evolve and develop and rise to the occasion. And I think that's, otherwise, if you prejudge and you say this so-and-so cannot do, forget about other people's negative talk. A lot of people who are doing work in so-called brain science are saying that the brain is constantly listening to you. So if you keep telling yourself that you can't do, then you can't do. So you have to tell yourself that, I can't do it yet. Meaning that you keep telling your brain that, okay, you can't do it now, but if you keep trying, you will be able to do it. But if you say, I can never remember names, you take it from me, you'll never remember them. But if you say that, yes, I don't remember them now, but I am kind of working at it and trying to work ways by which I can remember names, then you move forward. And I think it's extremely important somewhere that this insight that you have to individual psychology gets as much extended to social psychology, and we start to speak in terms of how is it that we live together as a humanity? What is it that we can do for each other? And we don't use the human rights game as a way of one community or one set of people trumping the others. And trump is, of course, a pretty important word at this point. I come with this to the last, I definitely want us to have more discussion, so I'm sort of glad that I've not had a single cloud flashed on me, so I'm kind of well within my time, I think. So I just want to make this, you can say in a way, join the dots that I have put at several places. And I'm sort of asking you, if you want social change, what requires? Social change requires social movements. It's something which has come at several points since yesterday in quite many presentations that yes, social change requires social movements. And what has happened for us is what identity politics has done, that it has created social movements, but it has created, to a large extent, very segregated social movements. It's kind of, and so to want to bring, but at the same time, without that identity politics, even the first level of the social movement would not have happened. The only question that we need to ask is, do we want to stay only with these silos as Eleanor was mentioning in the previous session? Or is it that we are wanting to somewhere start to meld our identities and to start seeing the commonalities between us? So I would say social movements need associational activity, need for us to join together in interaction, association. I'm not necessarily saying that, okay, if there is some monolith that we are creating where all of us are looking and are aspiring for the same thing. But it's like at a larger level, as we are aspiring for a space under the sun for all. And people need to connect to have associational activity. Intersectionality provides you with a conceptual apparatus which helps you to find those connections. That's the way we need to be looking at this entire issue, and I think that's the potential there. So for me, it would be like, if there are these multiple ways in which we can connect, and I think every individual and every community and every country would need to work out what those interconnections are. Across countries, what are the interconnections? Across cities, what are the across families, what are the interconnections? Interconnections would happen at several kinds of levels. And we all know that possibly the first level of opportunity many of us are requiring is in our own family. It's when that opportunity comes there that you move to the next step. And so this isn't something which only speaks at the meta level, it speaks at both, at the meta level, at the micro level, at the mid level. You need to talk and think in terms of that. So the way if that is the way which we are creating connections, if those are the bonds there is possibility of forging, and they should be like loose bonds. They shouldn't be strangleholds. They are just, like where it's like two holes should remain two holes. No one hole should become the path of the others, but they should roll along. And there should be possibility for everybody to roll along. That's a way in which we need to be thinking in terms of how do we connect, because if you roll along, you bang each other at some points of time, no? And that's connecting. And that connection and that validation is, I think, what we're all looking for. So I would somewhere urge all of you to think of interconnections as opportunities. Opportunities to imagine, to strive, and to achieve a just world for all. Thank you so much.